but clouds also act as a planetary thermostat, averaging day and nighttime temperatures to make this planet habitable. NASA scientists say that even a small change in this delicate cloud balance can, quote, eliminate global warming or greatly enhance it. Ken Caldera, a physicist with Teller's Climate Modeling Group at the Lawrence Livermore Labs, warned a conference of geophysicists that spraying chemicals to form a solar sunscreen could destroy the ozone layer and trigger other devastating consequences.
All right, we're talking with Lynn Horowitz. Lynn, can you give us the latest on the lines in the sky?
Well, Clay, in my opinion, it is an expression of what's called non-lethal military warfare. And essentially, think tanks associated with NATO and the Allies had determined that the best method of conducting warfare contemporarily would no longer be nuclear, would no longer be standard military. It would be called, quote, non-lethal. And what that implies is that it was determined that both financially and in every other way, in order to heavily affect targeted populations and really make the most money or get the most bang for your buck, is essentially biological and chemical weapons. And what that did then is it said, it was determined that not only are they less expensive than nuclear and traditional military hardware to produce, that is, biologicals and chemicals, but they then make the populations that are exposed sick, and that they then become dependent on the pharmaceutical industrialists, which are actually the military medical pharmaceutical industrialists, as well as petrochemical affiliates that are highly aligned with the world banking powers. And so that you really, in a globalistic agenda, you have the same people making vast fortunes off of humanity's suffering, which when they're exposed to combinations, and this is the critical issue with non-lethal warfare, combinations of cofactors. In some circles it's called Russian biological cocktails, and I suppose it's called that since the Americans invented it. You know, the Russian biological cocktail called for combinations of biological and chemical weapon cofactors exposing targeted populations and then making them not dead but chronically ill. Then they become dependent on the pharmaceuticals. They virtually become drug addicts. And that is the manner in which societies and or targeted nations and populations would become virtually enslaved, economically debilitated as well as socially, morally. And that is the manner in which I currently see the chemtrail issue unfolding today. It is very clear to us that the chemtrails contain chemical toxins. JPA jet fuel, for example, contains ethylene dibromide. I have a statement, for example, from a CDC toxicologist that indeed some amount of ethylene dibromide, which had been pulled from the unleaded gasolines because they were so toxic to the immune system and to potentially be carcinogenic, cancer-causing, that they were actually, they are in the JPA jet fuel. So we know at least that we're being exposed to those chemicals. There's some suggestion that there's some biologicals. We have had some samples being sent to us. Again, we have not had any secondary confirmations on the fact that some of these samples do contain biological materials. And so there's been some speculation that there's both biological as well as chemicals in the chemtrails. The issue, though, is that, and this is the fundamental issue of non-lethal military warfare ongoing today, you have an attack on the immune system. Once immune systems are ravaged via chemical exposures, such as the chemtrails provide, as well as other chemical toxins in the environment, in the foods, in the water, and in the air, that you then have a weakened immune system, which then leaves people susceptible to opportunistic infections and other microbes that we are also being exposed to in new and better ways today. And so that You have, for example, the mycoplasma infection, which is associated with these upper respiratory infections, which is a core issue for the AIDS pandemic, as well as these upper respiratory infections that many, many people have been seen to be getting in the last few years that they never got before, that these are all linked to the dramatic immune suppression that is being initiated by chemical exposures. And so this is the primary, in my opinion, this is really what's going on with the chemtrail. The fact of the matter that you have similarly with the spraying of the anvil and malathion in the northeast regions over the last couple of summers for an alleged West Nile virus outbreak overlaps the entire chemtrail spraying, because anvil is produced by Chevron, that's a Rockefeller oil company, as well as most of the JPI jet fuels, all of the jet fuels virtually, are produced by the same Chevron. So that, again, you have ultimately, when you begin to investigate this issue, heavily implicated by the Rockefeller family, again, heart and soul to the military, medical, pharmaceutical industrialists, petrochemical industrialists, and international banksters that we have seen in the past be affiliated with global genocide.
Lynn, in the past, the warfare was directed at other countries. Why would our own military or our government want to weaken the American people at such a time when we've got China and Russia as potential enemies?
Well, the concept of Russia and China being potential enemies is as foolish as the Arabs believe that the Israelis, and the Israelis think the Arabs are potential enemies. The Jews think the Muslims are potential enemies. The Muslims think the Christians are potential enemies. I mean, you actually have the separation of the sheeple to divide the sheeple to conquer the flock being implemented in a globalistic agenda. So really the globalists are behind Chinese development today. All third world nations now have virtually come under the control of world banking powers, and there literally are very few families that are running the entire globalist agenda. Now, in that agenda, when you consider their documents, you begin to understand why they have called for and published their desire to reduce half of the United States' population. Why it would be that they would target the United States military, for example, with Gulf War syndrome, is another great example of non-lethal military warfare. Combinations of cofactors, biological and chemical weapons, very difficult to diagnose, even harder to treat. Why would they have known these vaccines delivered these types of effects, these cofactor diseases, along with the chemical toxins gotten in the Gulf? Well, the bottom line is that with a traditional U.S. military composed of sovereign-thinking, nationalist-thinking human beings who swear that they would kill and or be killed to defend the United States Constitution against all foreign and domestic threats. Well, you see, those types of people represent a liability in the New World Order or the globalist agenda, whereby you're looking at one world government, one world peacekeeping force, NATO, one world bank, one world economy, one world court, and so that, and one world, obviously, health organization, again, largely controlled by the Rockefeller family. So that these people represented a liability in this evolutionary time of a new world order, a globalistic agenda. So you have to cull them. You have to kill many of them. You have to defund them, demoralize them, defanging the United States military. And that's precisely, if you've talked to military officers, what's been going on for the last decade with the United States military. Likewise, the U.S. population. Clay, the number one question that people always ask me is, well, if this is done for economic reasons primarily, it's foolish, because why would they want to kill more people? Because they're making money from the people. Well, the bottom line is, I liken it to a monopoly game, where at the end of a monopoly game, virtually one person or one party owns all the real estate. And then at the end of the game, you put the board away,